Kindly just talk to us about the focus of your lecture on the mispronunciation of Oshiwambo personal names.
Thank you. I, I presented a lecture on Thursday on the mispronunciation of Oshiwambo names in Namibia, but I've also touched on the mispronunciation of names of other languages as well. The reason why I did that is because I've attended many gatherings, ceremonies, where names are mispronounced. Sometimes you don't know whether it is your name being mentioned, even if you listen to it. And sometimes when parents accompany their own sons and daughters to graduation ceremonies, they don't hear the names of their daughters and son being mentioned, and that is very unfortunate. And sometimes when these names are mentioned, they are butchered, as I used the word. You don't say the name correctly, and that seems to be an insult on the intelligence of the name givers, and also it's an insult to the name bearers, because when your name is changed, it changes the meaning of your name as well, and sometimes the name becomes meaningless. It becomes what we call semantically opaque. It doesn't carry the meaning at all, because most of our names have meaning. They are given for a purpose. They are linked to a certain situation in our life. And when the name is changed, it affects your personality as well.
All right. Professor, what are some of the most common mistakes people make when pronouncing names, and what do those mistakes reveal about our society?
There are several mistakes that people make when they pronounce their names. Sometimes people add sounds, and there are occasions where people delete sounds as well. For example, my name is, my surname is Mbenzi, and when sometimes you go to places, you hear someone saying Mapenzi. In that case, my name is butchered because, the person who has pronounced the name has added certain sounds which do not exist in my name. And in that case, the name is changed, or the meaning of the name is changed. And sometimes people delete sounds. For example, let's say your name is Usiku. The one will simply say Usiku. What does that mean? It doesn't really carry the meaning. The meaning of the name has been changed. In some cases, is the way the person pronounced the name. Let's say your name is Amfenu. Then one comes and says Amutenu. Amutenu. You can even clearly hear even the way the name is pronounced. You cannot really recognize that it's your name being pronounced, because sounds are added, and sometimes some sounds are removed from the name. And the moment you remove a sound from a name, that becomes a problem, because the meaning changes, and sometimes the name becomes semantically opaque. It doesn't bear the meaning at all. There are also occasions, sometimes we do it ourselves. There are occasions when people add certain sounds as well to their own names. In this case, people try to anglicize their names, to make their name look English. For example, you can add a sound such as ye or h. For example, you can say Nangoloch, Itach. In that case, the name is butchered. When you add a sound to a particular name, you destroy it. You change it completely. This basically means that in some cases, people do not prepare. When, as a leader or as a person, when you go people's names, let's imagine you are a lecturer or a professor, and you have to read out the names of your students. You are expected to prepare, go through those names, there should be no excuse to mispronounce other people's names. As a leader, you need to prepare before you go out in public and say those names correctly, because it hurts the feeling of the name bearers when their names are not pronounced correctly.
Professor, do you think the mispronunciation of names is a result of ignorance, perhaps lack of interest, or is it a systemic, linguist dominance?
In my opinion, I think people who mispronounce the names, they're simply careless. They don't care. You just go out someone's names without practicing. Practice makes perfect. You need to read the name first before I go out in the public. So as far as I'm concerned, people who mispronounce other people's names, they are simply careless. They don't care. They just go out and read. So it is important to practice, and it's important to go out and read the people's names correctly. But I'm not saying you should be 100% correct. But you must do it in such a way that the other person can hear that name.
All right. Kindly just explain the linguistic structure of names and why it's important to pronounce them correctly. Perhaps the linguistic culture of Oshiwambo names.
Okay, correct. I have already made reference to that. I have said when you remove a sound, delete a sound or add a sound, that changes the meaning of the name, or sometimes the name becomes semantically opaque. Let's take an important name in this country. Let's take the name Ngifike Punye. Okay? On some occasions you hear the name Ngifike Punye. The question is, who is Ngifike Punye? You have removed a sound. That is H. Once you remove a sound, then the meaning of the word or the meaning of the name changes. And that is an insult to the name bearer, because the name is not Ngifike Punye, the name is Ngifike Punye. The second example, let's take, for example, the name Wiliko. Wiliko. Now, some people pronounce this W as V. Now, if you pronounce this name as Viliko instead of Wiliko, then the meaning is completely changed. You are talking about something else. And that is an insult, as I said, to the name bearer. So one has to look at the importance or the significance of sounds in a name. Do not change the to se. If the name is Amazila, don't change it to Amadila or Amasila. That is incorrect, because you have changed the name, and the meaning is affected. If the name is Shikongo, don't change it to Sikongo, because again that becomes something else. In other words, my conclusion is that do not remove a sound. Also, do not add a sound, because that is how you butcher a name.
All right. How can educational institutions and media platforms help address this issue, and perhaps also just promote the correct pronunciation of indigenous names?
Yes. The public broadcaster has an important role to play when it comes to pronouncing the names correctly. Because many times it is usually the radio announcers or television presenters who mispronounce the names. And sometimes, what is funny sometimes is that they can even mispronounce their own names. It is important that before you go out to read the news, you must practice. You must read those names correctly. And if you don't understand how to say a name, please ask. You have enough time to ask. You have enough time to prepare. You need to prepare. You need to practice. Practice makes perfect. Also, when it comes to educational institutions, That is where teaching takes place. As a lecturer or a professor or a teacher, you need to set a good example to your learners by saying their names correctly. You know, when you say the names of the students incorrectly, it hurts their feeling and it makes them lose interest in the teaching. Therefore, when you read out the names of your students or your learners, you must do that correctly, because that is how you promote or you create an atmosphere, a pleasant atmosphere in the teaching learning situation. So it is our task as lecturers, as leaders, as professors, to make sure that names are said correctly. There should be no excuse at all to mispronounce other people's names. You know, for years.
Yes.
But you keep mispronouncing your student's name. That is quite unfortunate. It shouldn't be allowed. Let us set a good examples.
All right. Perhaps before we let you go, Professor Mbenzi, looking ahead, what are some of the strategies you recommend just to ensure that indigenous names, and not just Oshiwambo names, but all names, are preserved and respected in all spheres of Namibia?
You know, when it comes to what strategies, we should put in place, or mechanism that we need to put in place to ensure that names are said correctly, when it comes to European names, if you want to find out how a name is said in European languages, you just Google. These names are catered for. The names from European languages are catered for. You find them online. You can Google and find out how to say a name correctly. But when it comes to indigenous languages or African languages, we don't have that platform, where you can be assisted to say the names correctly. And therefore, I propose that an app be created to accommodate the correct pronunciation of names. In other words, the ball is in our court at present. We need to do a great job, because we should not simply complain about our names being mispronounced. We must do something. We must assist and help the people who mispronounce our names. And what must we do? We must create an app to help people pronounce our names correctly. That is what I have in mind. And we need to start a big project in this country. That should include not only Oshiwambo, but this kind of project should include all indigenous languages, where people should collect a number of names, thousands and thousands of names, and those thousands and thousands of names, an app must be created for these names, and people should hear the names being said correctly. And that is how we assist other people. But in the meantime, there should be no excuse to mispronounce the names of other people. We must do our homework as lecturers, professors, public leaders. And when we read the names of our leaders, for example, we must really say the names of our leaders correctly. But not only the names of leaders, but also names of all the people in this country. We must really try to say them correctly. No excuse. There should be no excuse to mispronounce the names of other people. Let's not think that because we don't have an app, we can do whatever we like. No, that is incorrect. It's not acceptable, because it hurts the feeling of the name bearers. Yeah.